Hello, welcome.
Hi.
So today I am interviewing Gwendolyn Dolske, who is the host of the Good is in the Details podcast. She does a lot of other great things, so I'm going to let her introduce herself. So I'm going to ask, as I often do for my guests, hello, who are you? How do we know each other? And where can people find you online?
My name is Gwendolyn Dolske. I'm a philosophy professor, a writer, a podcaster, and a mom. I became a new mom by surprise 3.5 years ago. And people can find me on Instagram at Prof. Dolske. I'm also doing TikToks with the same name at Prof. Dolske. And then Good is in the Details on all the podcast platforms where there you can listen to our work. And we know each other because a little while ago, our high school put some sort of a post about me. I don't remember what it was on Instagram. And you must have looked at it and then reached out to me as a result of that post. And you saw that I was in podcasting and you said you were in podcasting. And so we've been following each other on our socials. And I love your content. You're just such a light. I mean, I'm looking forward to when you're on Good is in the Details. I absolutely love your content. I think you're inspiring, you're charming. And so maybe the feeling's a bit mutual because you asked for me to be on your show too.
Well, absolutely. So yes, I do recall that. And I saw that you were connected with Andrea
Yes.
when I looked into you, and I was like, wait, how does she know that? So was one of my teachers at Rosary, but also a fellow Rosary alum.
Mm-hmm.
And the feeling is absolutely mutual. I'm absolutely floored and honored to have you. You are not only incredibly beautiful for anyone who can't see you right now, but absolutely brilliant. I love your podcast. You not only speak across a myriad of topics, which is super inspiring for me, but the way that you articulate yourself and the way that you approach a lot of really difficult and deep discussions is really inspiring to me. And for the record, your content is outrageously incredible and compelling and poignant. And I really love the work you're doing. And I will say, people have to hear this a lot until I'm blue in the face, that I've always been wildly impressed with the outputs of Rosary High School alum.
Yes.
I do think there is such a beautiful power in putting specifically females in an environment where we are not competing for the attention of our male adolescent counterparts, and we are just working in an empowering environment. I don't know if you experience this or if you attribute any of your successes, the many that you have, to going to an all-girls school, but I will never forget that my freshman year specifically of college, how many professors pulled me aside and said, you went to an all-girls school, didn't you? They knew because of the level of confidence I had, raising my hand, speaking out in class. They said, females do not raise their hand like that. And typically when we see it, it's because it's an individual who went to an all-girls school. And I thought, wow, to be able to recognize that level of empowerment in a woman and to know that my counterparts in my college level courses didn't necessarily show that. I thought that was a huge testament, because how else would they know besides just raising my hand? That simple gesture and I had multiple professors. I don't know if you experienced that being a professor yourself, or again, having been a student and a product of an all-girls learning environment. Have you noticed any trends in that regard?
Yeah, I think I had that same experience when I first started university, and I was just surprised by the commentary, but I also was surprised about how some of the friends that I had made, the young women friends that I had made who were very bright in our spaces when we would talk, but then when we were in a social setting, I was surprised by how much they would minimize that for the attention of, the young men. And it was something that I didn't see in myself or with other women from my class. And there's something about an all-girls school in which all of the spaces, when it comes to sports, governing, social spaces, cheering, that those are occupied completely by young women. And that's not really the reality of the world. So when you have that, it just instills a confidence in you that you don't know any other way of being. Like at Rosary, you didn't know any other way of being other than showing up and paying attention to the material that the teachers were giving you. And then that mentality goes into university, into other classrooms. Whereas somebody might have the mentality of going to class to show off their new outfit or to really show that they're a crush on somebody. We were just so laser focused on education and that the partying, it's not like we didn't have any friends or social life, but all the partying and the interaction, like with boys and such, that happened after those school hours. So it's not that like we were without it. It's just that school time was for learning.
Yes. Do you see that has, like, in your life outside of university in terms of empowerment? I'm really excited. This perfectly fits into where I'm hoping to talk to you today. As a professor and a lifelong learner of philosophy, which just quite frankly overwhelms me, and I'm hoping you can help me digest it a bit, is, my emphasis in university was in gender studies. So
Oh,
not so much from a philosophical standpoint, but this idea of, which is such a hot topic today,
yeah.
and the differences and empowerment of various genders and where we sit in society specifically. But for you, as you look at, I know that I looked up a class that you taught. I'm not sure if you're still teaching it this semester, but the philosophy of sex and love, moral theory, and existentialism, does that go into gender roles, or where does gender roles play a part in such a deep topic of really philosophy and the role of sex in our society?
Yeah. So philosophy means the translation from the Greek to English literally means love of wisdom. So that's a pretty large ballpark. That means everything is on the table. And when somebody earns their PhD, PhD stands for philosophy doctorate. So you are a lover of wisdom if you have a PhD in history, gender studies, biology. That PhD means that you are a lover of wisdom to pursue that. And since everything is on the table, things like gender and sexuality are also on the table. And I have to confess that my background was in existentialist literature and I did a lot on moral theory. And I ended up teaching that class on philosophy of sex and love because the person who was teaching it retired and the chair of the department asked if I could take it. And I was in a hurry when I said yes. And I just said yes, not paying attention to what I had said yes to. I just said yes. And then I was busy with, I had some traveling to do. And then all of a sudden the semester starts and I see philosophy of sex and love. Oh my God. And I'm thinking love is for the poets or that's for psychology. I study things like what is justice. I don't know anything about this. And I had to take a break and sit back and think, wait a minute, of all the people I've studied, they had to have mentioned love. Where does it show up in philosophy? And I started with Plato. Plato wrote a book called The Symposium, which is really about 7 or 8 drunk men sitting around a table and they are drinking copious amounts of wine. And then they stand up and say what their definition of love is. And I thought, okay, if this is important enough for Plato to write about it, then there's something here. And I enjoyed, like I said, I enjoyed topics like justice. And I started to look at the way that our laws are structured. And this goes into stuff about gender studies as well. Our laws are structured where they reflect an idea of who you can and cannot love, and in what way you can and cannot love, and how much money and investment, and what you can teach about that. Our laws are reflections about that. And so I started to take more seriously this topic, that it is something that is a force, it drives us. The absence of love is horrifying. That means you would wake up every day just not caring about anything, no friends, no work. So there's something to it, but it's elusive because it's on a continuum. If I were to tell you what the definition of love is right now, you would not feel satisfied. That wouldn't do anything for you. Or if I say you want to know what love is, here's what Shakespeare wrote. That's the end of the story. It wouldn't feel satisfied. There's something about this ongoing process of what it means to love, and it's expanding. But it's not 100% subjective because we need some sort of boundary around the definition. Otherwise, everything is love and nothing is love. So it has to be something. When it comes to something like gender studies, that would be, now I don't know. I mean, I'm in philosophy, so I'm not doing gender studies exactly. But when we're talking about the nature of love and the nature of sex, a lot of it comes down to, well, what are our assumptions about this process? And can we just take a look at what those assumptions are? And a lot of people don't want to because we've really structured an economic idea around one particular view of sexuality and gender roles. And so when somebody is challenging that, they're not just challenging one little thing, they're challenging an entire economic dynamic of a sense of who somebody is and the way things are supposed to be. And we've seen in the last 50 years a real shakeup. And I say 50s because I think a lot of what we're experiencing today, these questions about gender, I think they started in the 70s because a lot of laws changed in the 70s. You have Title IX, which means that women can, you have the concept of the female athlete, really. Women can all of a sudden participate in sports. There's money for that. There's teams, there's coaches. That means that young women after school aren't just caring about their boyfriends, or they're caring about something else, excellence, sports. So that changed the dynamic right there. Then in the 70s, you have women, it's legal for them to have their own bank accounts. And then in the 80s, women can have their own businesses. And so with this shift, women are coming into a sense of self that is not just designed to be organized around what it means to be a man. Now, what it means to be a woman is growing and is being more of a full participant in society. That changes the very dynamics of love and sexuality. Another thing that I think happened that was just before the 70s is you had the Supreme Court strike down anti-miscegenation laws, which means that throughout the United States, you can marry outside of your race. And that also changed things. That changed the notion of love, that changed the notion of who you were allowed to love. So before bank accounts, before this notion of, business, the woman athlete having her own interests, and also this restriction in terms of race and ethnicity and who you can marry, once you eliminate that, then the ideas of what it means to be in love shift, because before that, marriage was really an economic agreement. Love and attraction was not really necessary for a good marriage. What was good marriage was the man made money and then the woman did the domestic labor and they had kids. It wasn't really significant if you were attracted to each other. You remove that economic incentive, meaning that women can provide for themselves and men can do their own laundry. All of a sudden, what's at stake is, are you attracted to each other and how do you express that? So the unfolding of what we see today, I think, started back in the 70s.
Gosh,
Was that
attraction.
too
I
much?
know this is no, it was
I
beautiful.
didn't
I
want to
love
go
how
off
you
in lecture
speak.
mode. Okay.
Oh my gosh, can I take notes? Is she going to hear me? I absolutely love the way you speak. I can only imagine how excited your students are to have you. Not only, again, just your brilliant mind, but how you articulate yourself and are able to digest it for us lay people is incredible. Especially with something so heavy. I don't know if heavy is the right term, but as mind blowing as existentialism. The idea of looking at where we exist, how we're showing up in the world, and where it is impacted, whether we like it or not, by policy is can be a bit overwhelming, and it has us looking at our own individuality of where we show up in the world, and we want to believe that we're not necessarily have to be so much impacted by these laws that have been enacted or debunked or whatever it might be coming from the 70s and 80s, before I technically existed, that are still affecting how I get to show up in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where it's such a difficult topic to try to tackle in the few, the half hour that we have. But where I particularly was excited to speak to you was one of my personal passions that I haven't spoken about publicly on my podcast, but I do try to instigate conversations, is sexual education. And I thought that you might be a really great person to speak to on the topic, because I know that you've had a couple podcast episodes, you've been a guest speaking to sexual education, which is, again, a really expansive topic and a broad topic, but in the context of information, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
context of, today, with Google, you can just about, a child can, in terms of sexual education, the infancy stages of their sexual education, a child can virtually Google anything. Now, is that the kind of sexual education we want? Probably not. I would argue that that's not the best way. But from a philosophical goal of shaping human behavior and looking at how it affects not only our social norms in the context of marriage or lack thereof. Do you see a tie-in between how we educate our children on sex and where that might show up in terms of shaping human behavior in society?
Yes, and I want to make sure that I start by crediting the journalist Peggy Orenstein because I've been really influenced by her work. So influenced that sometimes what I say might be actually taken from her. So I want to make sure I credit her. I think that from the philosopher in me who enjoys definitions and ideas, I want to step back and say, wait a minute, what do we mean by education in the first place? And I think education has really two parts to it. Like, what is the purpose of it? And the first part is to provide the knowledge and information that we have. That's partly what it means to be education. And then the second part is the critical thinking skills in order to move forward, to check what it is that we think we know, to know if that is solid or where do we go from there. If you're missing that second part, I don't think it's education. I think it's indoctrination. You have to have that second part to do what you can with that information, that knowledge. So, and that's what we would consider to be a good education. I've asked my students, I put the word education on the board and I'm like, define what is an aspect of a good education. And all of it is like, you know more. It inspires curiosity. It is good. It is useful. Like we have all these ways to just talk about education in and of itself. And if it's not doing those things, if that we understand that's what's good, if it's not doing those things, then we've got a problem, a not so great education. So let's just accept what is we mean by education, that it's for good citizenry, that for also for health, also for people to enjoy their lives, and also for some sort of a promotion of a good society. So if we can accept that that's the definition of society, and then we take a look at, let's add sex to it, let's be specific, sex education. Are we actually doing that? And I don't think so. In some places, it's completely absent. And then in places where it does exist, what it is talking about is the biological reality of reproduction, which is not really what sex is. That the reality of having a child is one possible byproduct of sex. But let's be honest about what sex is. It is not just that biological reality. It is also a very personal, can be spiritual, it's an emotional, it's a physically pleasurable experience. All of these things need to be in context. Otherwise, we're really robbing people of understanding what is going on. And I think that the failure is showing up in different ways where, you and I actually shared this article. Kate Julian in The Atlantic wrote about, and this was in 2018, wrote about the sex recession, that people are having a lot less sex, the youth in particular. And at first, everyone was all excited, like, yay, like we have this idea that sex is bad. I want to be clear for anyone who's pretty conservative in their thinking. I'm not advocating for extreme promiscuity and not caring about anybody. I'm not advocating for that when I'm talking in these terms. I'm just saying that what Kate Julian's article recognized was that the reasons that there is a sex recession and that people are having less sex are not good. And I read that as a philosopher, and I think we have to reevaluate what we mean by sex, that sex is the expression of a lot of things: pleasure, health, right? There has to be some sort of a healthy vibe going on, a healthy relationship, communication, vulnerability. There are all of these things: romance, love, commitment, then sex is the expression of all of these things. Sometimes all at once, maybe just a few. You remove, if sex is gone, that means those things are gone. So we have to take a look at what is it that we are doing. And in Kate Julian's article and also the work of Peggy Orenstein, they're seeing that there is the lack of relationships that people are having with each other because they're on their phones all the time, or they are getting their sex ed, I put in air quotes, from porn that's on any Google search that's just very prevalent. Then being able to be vulnerable and communicate with somebody and be in love with somebody and laugh with somebody and get embarrassed in front of somebody, like all of those things, they're going away so that we're spending more time on the phone and we are not engaging in this activity that can be a very beautiful and healthy expression of what it means to be.
Oh my gosh, that was very beautifully put. I'm also going to link Kate Jillian's article and Peggy Ornstein in the show notes for anybody who
Mhm.
wants to dive more deeply into the work that's inspired you. When we look at sex, I mean, I completely agree. I think that where I feel very blessed and a little conflicted in my Catholic upbringing is that my parents absolutely spoke about sex in that context, maybe a little too pleasure forward in their education and speaking about sex. And it was really because as children, both my brother and I, but specifically I, noticed that I grew up in the era, I was in third grade when our president of the United States was in a sex scandal, which was just a very hard thing to try to comprehend as a third grader, right? Because you're thinking, why would someone do that? It doesn't make sense because that pleasure piece was not, it just, none of it made sense to me, right? And so I think for a lot of people who are my age specifically, who were coming of age during that particular scandal, it forced a lot of conversations with children and parents because you couldn't find a news channel that wasn't talking about it at the time.
Mm.
And then it provoked a lot more questions on, but what did he do and why was it wrong? And I'm confused, he's married, right? And so my parents really leaned into this idea of, well, this is how sex is used in society or can be used or should be used. But then in conjunction with, and here are some of the detriments of the pursuit of the pleasure of that comes with sex. And I'm really grateful in a lot of ways for how that was given to me from my parents, but also was hyper aware that my cohorts, the children, the classmates, were not getting those same types of conversation. And again, growing up in a Catholic environment, it was a little it was extremely conflicting. And so I think where I struggle both internally and then trying to think about my friends and their children and what do we want their healthy sex lives to look like, and where do I want my future children, should I be blessed enough to have any, what do I want their healthy sex lives to look like? I believe that it not only does it start with sexual education, but then it goes into the body acceptance, the positivity, the body positivity, body autonomy, which I think is still something we're not properly communicating in our society. Because at the end of the day, pleasure or not, I still see that sex is weaponized against children in the form of abuse by adults or even older quote children, adolescents in their lives. And in my personal life, where I've seen a lot of detriment, and this might be a little oversimplistic, but when I talk to someone and I sit down and I'm hearing about the struggles of their life, whatever it may be, right? But the things that pain them, I could almost always trace it back to some type of sexual misconduct, whether that was the fact that their father had an affair, extramarital affair, and they have a sibling they didn't know about, whether they find out that their father's not actually their biological father because of some extramarital affair, whether they experienced sexual abuse or they found out that their mother was raped when they were younger, whatever it might be. A lot of times we will see, in my experiences, not as a therapist, just as a person living in the world, I keep seeing that a theme of some type of sexual misconduct, depravity, or even just in the context of a, we'll say, natural extramarital affair of some type of deviance that has occurred. How are we stopping it happening from our children? What are we
Yeah.
doing in this light of access to sexual education? How are we, because again, in my limited experiences, I'm not even going to use statistics. I can only speak to my limited experiences of my little small network of, it's not a stranger on the street. It's almost always a family member or trusted friend who's the perpetrator, right? And so in that context, outside of other horrific acts of terror and violence that can occur in terms of sexual violence, but when I'm like, okay, but why haven't you told your parents, or how did this happen, and why did your uncle have access to you, and why did that babysitter have access to you, how did your parents not know? And if we're not talking about it to our parents and confronting the fact that they didn't protect us as much as they maybe could have, how are we going to correct the wheel for our children? And that's what I'm struggling with now as, as a young, quote, young, not so young, tell it to my ovaries adult, trying, looking at parenthood in that context and knowing that that is a big source of pain that continues to hurt others. Like, where might you in your studies and background see the possible empowerment of that level of education to give to our children in the context of protecting them at a young age and then also empowering them in their sexual pursuits, life, happiness, success in the future as adults?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, especially like I said, as a new mom, and now I've got a child that's 3.5, and I want for her to have a good life. I want for her to enjoy her life, and so I think about these things, and I want to protect people, and I think this is also one of the reasons why sex needs to be talked about, and the reality of the impact of pornography needs to be discussed. So one of the ideas is to there's two things I think are going on when sex ed, and I'll just repeat this, but when sex ed is taught, it's normally taught in terms of here's what a fertilized egg is, and then that's the end of the discussion. Or young women will learn about periods, and then that's it, and that really does not describe what is going on with sex. So this silence around it, I think that I'll give grace to the people who are using the silence because they want to protect their children. All of the studies, all of the work indicates that it does the exact opposite. That when you talk about sex in terms of consent or all of these health benefits, for instance, and different degrees depending on the age of the child, of course, but health benefits or the way in which you feel closer to somebody, it helps you get a good night's sleep. For men, it lowers cardiovascular disease. Like there are all of these wonderful things that are bonding about sexual experience, not something you talk to a third grader about, but we need to even be able to name the terms of the body. And the terms of the body are just, girls don't really have words, like they're told not to touch their own bodies. They don't even have names for their own parts. Boys might have a name like their pee-pee or something like that that's cute, but girls don't even have it. And this silence means that when something awful happens, whether it is on the scale of awful, whether it is inappropriate touching or a total violation, if there is not an understanding of the language, then that child has a very difficult time communicating that something is wrong and even knowing that something is wrong. So even into young adulthood, one of the reasons for the sexist recession, and this doesn't have to do with violation so much, but this has to do with bad or painful sex, which means that young women do not even understand how their own bodies are supposed to function. You will reduce the bad and painful sex if you teach what it is supposed to be doing. And no young woman would ever tolerate something where she is not paid attention to or, sexually or given the opportunity to be vulnerable and to enjoy herself. But as long as we teach sex as though it's just reproduction or often that it's just something done to the woman, then people are not going to be able to experience that as part of their life. But in terms of sexual violence, sexual assault, and things like that, you're absolutely right. And I just think that other people can be brought into the narrative because there's this tension between parents and teachers, right? Of who is going to have this discussion. I would invite another group of professionals to join the conversation to alleviate that tension. And I think that could be doctors. And so I would think about all of the doctor's appointments I had. I don't think there was ever a conversation about how my parts worked and what was going on. It was like you just get a checkup and go. Think about how much that would change the conversation if doctors were part of explaining what is supposed to be going on. So a lot of the trauma has to do, I think, with treating especially women's body parts like Voldemort, like you just don't say it. That just leaves us no room for communication and for understanding and a lot of room for harm.
I think I have a couple ex-boyfriends who'd probably call my vagina Voldemort if they had the chance. So thank you for triggering that memory. Where I do get a bit dismayed, despite Kate Julian's, article that talks about this sex recession, is that with the social media and technology, this swinging the pendulum the other way to really say, well, this is my freedom of expression and I'm going to show myself. And then the over sexualization, which I'm not sure is really correcting the issue of having empowerment over our bodies, but and maybe you can articulate this better for me. I feel like it's swinging the pendulum in the wrong direction, or maybe towards the right direction, but just way far out to where we're almost, to your point with the how porn is so prolific, I would say is kind of parallel to this over sexualization specifically of women in the media. And so I was curious about like what you see the balance is there between not talking about our body parts to children, little girls, but then having this juxtaposition of women, doing really raunchy things on the internet, on the Instagram, and where we find that balance of a healthy, active sexual relationship.
Yeah, I've thought about this too. I mean, I think that, well, I don't think that I'm in the same position as of you as terms of thinking of sexuality in the confines of a marriage. But I do also, somebody might mistake me thinking that I would be all for just being all over the place. But no, I mean, in terms of moral theory, I'm very much that you never use another human being. So this would be from the philosopher Immanuel Kant, the idea that a human being should always be treated as an end in herself or himself, never as a means only. And I agree with that. And what that essentially means is that a means only is when you treat a person like an object, like a tool. So for example, if I have my pen, I'm holding it up, but your listeners can't see it. I'm holding a pen. If I throw it across the room, nobody's going to say you have violated the rights of the pen. That's not possible. But if I pick up my friend Jennifer and I throw her, then I have done something wrong. I think that when it comes to sex, we need to be very careful. While I am an advocate for people understanding themselves and enjoying themselves in a healthy manner, I would never be okay with somebody violating somebody else or using another person for their own need. I think that that's problematic. And I think that falls into consent as well, because we talk about consent in terms of touching and in terms of the physical, but there's also this kind of emotional and mental consent that it seems like it's off the table when it comes to sex, but it is very much on the table for any other kind of an arrangement. And what I mean by that is when somebody is giving consent to a sexual relationship based on what they know about the other person, thinking the other person is being honest, right? And if the other person is lying in order to get sex with that person, I think that's a violation of consent. That would be illegal in any other context. If I were to buy a car, for example, and the person selling me the car did not tell me that something was wrong with the car because they wanted me to buy the car, and I buy the car and something's wrong, I can sue them for that. That's problematic. But we don't have that same kind of conversation when it comes to sex. And I think that that kind of understanding that this is not just any other activity, right? This is just we're talking about somebody's emotional and physical vulnerable self. And more education, I think, would help in that vein. I think I've gotten away from what you were asking, but
No, I love it though.
remind
Gosh,
me.
I really do.
Yeah, something that I think has happened. So this isn't exactly in the direction of assault, but the idea of like, I call it, I'm going to draw a parallel with health and with food. I'm going to draw that parallel. I'm calling this the Taco Bellization of sex, what's happened. So my parallel will work that, we would spend times making nutritious food. You have that with family, with friends. It's a social activity. And then food just looked at just some sort of an efficiency thing. You just go and fast food, microwavable foods were happening. You could get more done, but all of a sudden you're eating alone. It's not healthy. It's very quick. We have more cup holders in cars, and now fast food is made in bite size so that you can eat. It's just shove the food in your face and then get on with your day. It's no longer an event. It's just to satisfy this one thing. And what are we seeing? People's health is just falling apart. It's falling apart. Just satisfying an immediate need for food by just giving you the food is not working. You need to be able to plan a meal. You know what's nutritious. Like nobody goes to Taco Bell thinking it's a good idea. It might not make you feel better an hour or the next day. You know that you can go to the store. You know that you can prepare something healthy. It takes more time, and you can have a conversation with people while you're preparing and while you're eating. But once that option for something really fast is there, we tend to go for it, and it's not working. And I think that's what's happening with sex and with dating apps and with porn. We think that this is some sort of an efficient way to just satisfy that very physical need, and that's all that has to be done. And it's not working. There are reports that men are lonelier than they ever have been. Pornography is more prevalent and it's more violent. And then young women are getting their education from this and thinking that's the way that they're supposed to be, that's the way they're supposed to look. And it is awful for them. And children have access to the internet younger and younger. So teachers want to talk about sex ed younger and younger. And people are saying that's so inappropriate. But the fact of the matter is, the internet will get to your kid before, unless the teacher gets there first or the parents do. That's why we have to talk about it younger and younger. So I think that there has to be a whole re-examination, just as we have to do with our health and our diet. Like, what is food really for? What is meal prep for? It's supposed to fuel you, right? And you can have these great conversations in this great life. After you have a meal, you should feel like going out for a walk. If you don't feel like walking, you didn't eat the right thing. You didn't fuel yourself. And the same thing with sex. It's just that Taco Bell moment, that Tinder hookup. It's not going to make you light the next day, make you smile for no reason. It's not going to nurture your soul in any way, bring you closer to yourself or to the other person. And I think that that's what we're finding out.
Well, what you just said is actually a perfect segue into something I haven't mentioned. So, if you don't know, Gwendolyn, you are the first episode in my new season. I'm all renewed and starting over. And what you just said exactly in terms of health and food and what we put into our bodies, I love that parallel because in this season of my life, I actually built out a philosophy that I called myself. So I don't know if I'm allowed to make my own philosophies. You'll have to tell me that.
You go for
You
it.
can correct me. But it's this idea of what I call Seth balance. Now, Seth is SEFPH. And it's a term that I made up. It means spiritual, emotional, financial, and physical health. And it's something that it's just a really quick acronym that I can use when I'm evaluating and doing a quick analysis or inventory of my life of, okay, how am I feeling spiritually? How am I feeling emotionally? How will this impact? How will this decision, right, with Taco Bell, whatever it could be, it impact me spiritually, emotionally, financially, physically? And what I do think that is interesting about sex is that there are serious, I would say that Taco Bell doesn't necessarily have serious immediate consequences spiritually, right? Physically, perhaps, maybe even emotionally, right? Financially, not so much because it's not a big financial burden one way or the other, but perhaps long term. But with sex, we know that there are serious, I mean, we just thought in talking about the context of morality, right? We know that there are spiritual implications to sex. There are serious emotional implications. Of course, when you look at family planning and healthcare costs and economic implications, the finance touches, and then being a physical act for the most part, it of course has a lot of physical implication. So that's why I think it's so great that the first episode in my Seth journey, my Seth path to health, I need to find a better way to phrase that you came on. I do really appreciate kicking that off. But on that note, and as we close out, may I ask you that is there something that you find really strong in terms of this Seth balance that is really strong for you and healthy? Or is there an area where maybe you wish you could do a little bit better? Because I think that sometimes what we do is we put a lot of focus on one dimension and then let another dimension subside. I think right now, physically, I'm not working out as much as I could be because I'm so hyper focused on my emotional and spiritual health at the moment. But is there something that you see in your life in terms of being on having a Seth balance where you're maybe a little bit stronger or not as strong?
That's tough because it really is a balancing act. I will say I am getting gentler with myself. I used to beat myself up a lot. And then getting older, I realized I don't need to do that. And then the other thing is a lot of women have been told, like, I don't know, you can do this idea of what it means to do it all is just so vague. And so then young women say, I want to do it all, but we don't really know what the hell all is. And all in success and happiness, for you, it's these four pillars. They mean different things, what they're going to be expressed as. I would say that what I have learned in order to be able to manage those four things is that I can't do it all at once. So like when you said like, oh, I need to get to the gym or this or that, there are times when I am able to put more effort into working out. And that is because something else is kind of taken care of. But I can't do it all at once. Like I can't be exercising and be a mom and be a professor. I can't be a mom and a professor at once. I can't even be a podcaster and a professor at once. I can do all of it, but I can balance it and do it at different times. And then I am so much happier because when I am doing any of those things, I'm giving 100% of my energy to it. And I'm gentler with myself and just recognizing like it's okay if everything that I wanted to get done doesn't get done today. That's okay. I would say one of the biggest shifts for me, I did not know that I was going to have my daughter. I've mentioned her like 3 or 4 times now because she's such a big, miraculous part of my life. I was told my entire life that really pregnancy was very unlikely. Let's just put it that way. And so when I had her, it was just a huge mindset shift for me. And I'm an older older woman. And before her, I would measure a good day by maybe my to-do list and how productive I was. And then after having her, how I would measure a good day is radically different. It's, I'm alive, she's alive. We had a walk, we laughed, she learned a new game. I talked to some friends. Everything about the measurement of a good day for me now is about relationships with others. And I think that becoming a mom is what made that shift for me. The productive stuff is the secondary thing. And I think about that even with my work with my students. I care more about the relationship and the interactions that I have with them than I do just about the bottom line of how many things did I grade today. It's like, wait, how did I participate in their intellectual development? That's what I care about. Even with podcasting, with Good is in the Details, I love the connection that I have with my co-host Rudy. Rudy was also a Servite grad, by the way, but I love the connection that I have with him. And whenever we're talking about a good episode, it's not just about like what was scheduled, but it's, what did we learn? How did we grow? How are he and I better? What did we put out into the world? It's about relationships. So I would say it's on a continuum scale. What is good for me now might not be good for me in 5 years. Right now, I'm at peace because I think I have come to a point where I am focusing more on the joy of my relationships. And that made all the other things actually easier to do.
Oh, well, I do want to say in regard to your daughter, she is so, so very lucky to not only have a strong and again, very beautiful, please find Prof. Dolske online. You'll know what I'm talking about. But just forward thinking, intentional, intelligent, intellectual mother who is embracing challenging conversations and talking about the impacts of society. She is absolutely a blessed, lucky little girl to have you. I see that.
Thank
And I
you.
hope that you know that. And I can only imagine what an incredible young woman she's going to grow up into. It makes me really excited when I see proactive and intentional parenting because I know it's easy to look at all the negatives in the world, but I still have a lot of hope in our future, and it's because of parents like you. So I do want to say that, and that God's plan was so perfect when he placed her in your life. And I think that some of the most unexpected, beautiful blessings are just the best things that have happened to us. Before we wrap up, I just want to say, can you one more time just remind everyone where they can find you online if they want to dive more deeply into all the work that you've done, your incredible podcast that I really enjoy. I did not know that Rudy was from Servite, by the way. I'm loving the tri-school love.
Mhm.
Servite was our brother school for anyone listening and not aware, that was the all boys brother school. But can you just tell us one more time where everyone can find you online?
Yeah. So Instagram is at Prof. Dolske, ProfDolske. And then the podcast is Good is in the Details. We've got a website, goodisinthedetails.com, and it's available on all platforms. It's one of I'm glad you're back into podcasting because honestly, I think it's just such a joy. Like it's such a beautiful thing to put out these conversations, to really delight in the art of conversation. So thank you for having me on. And I'm excited when your book comes out and you can be on Good is in the Details for anyone listening. She's going to be on ours too.
I cannot wait. And I'm going to link everything. I'm going to link your Instagram, your podcast into the podcast details for anyone who wants to find it and do a quick click. I really, really, really want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you for joining me today, because your insights into the philosophy of sex, the profound impact on society, have not only been enlightening, but you just, in so many ways, you inspire me. And so I thank you for your expertise. Thank you for enriching my understanding of such a pivotal aspect of human existence. And I'm really, really looking forward to visiting you and hopping on your podcast to talk about my book that I'm very excited about. And I'm ready to just have it out. I'm ready to just have it out in the world, because it's been a labor of love, and I'm really grateful. But thank you so, so much again. And I look forward to connecting soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Eavesdrop with Ella. If today's episode inspired you to pursue personal or professional growth, visit my website, ellayourbella.com, where you can find more empowering content and resources. You can also contact me directly for a consultation so we can transform your challenges into triumphs together. Until next time, this is Ella Parler reminding you to stay resilient, stay abundant, and above all, stay balanced. Subscribe, share, rate, and review this podcast to help us connect with more eavesdroppers just like you. Thank you for eavesdropping, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
You have been listening to Eavesdrop with Ella, a production of EP Consulting. Some of the products and services mentioned are paid promotions, and any advice should be confirmed with a qualified professional. Opinions and ideas are for entertainment purposes only and belong to EP Consulting. All rights reserved.
Boom!